G'day, hey, so just before we start, and this is not an ad, no money has changed hand, but have you guys ever tried Monster Energy Ultra Peachy Keen? I'm drinking some right now, it's bloody delicious. So, we're probably pretty close now to Monster Hunter Wilds getting a proper pre-release demo. My guess would be the middle of January, about a month before release. But hey, Capcom could plop one down any day now for all we know. Hey, what smells like hopium in here? Also peaches. Weird, but a lot of things have apparently been tightened up, screwed down, and otherwise refined since we had our hands on the beta and gave Capcom our feedback, which they listened to. Isn't that a treat in today's day and age? Imagine the customer being listened to. So that's exciting. But while we had the beta, when, among many other things, I was testing all the weapon types, trying to figure out what I'll want to be maining on release, I came to an unexpected and shocking conclusion. And that's not just sort of me using baity words. I was genuinely shocked by what happened. I'm going to need a new controller just for Monster Hunter Wilds, basically. Well, need is a strong word, of course. I do have a small pile of various controllers to choose from already. Some of them really quite good. I've reviewed several of them. So it's a want, if we're absolutely honest, of course. Not a need, a want. But it feels close to a need, just because of how much I friggin' love Monster Hunter, and I want the best, most refined experience possible. And it's because none of my existing controllers have exactly the combination of features and functionality that I've decided will be perfect for Monster Hunter Wilds, and it's for quite a surprising reason, like I said. And after some poking around, some experimentation, and some indecision like you wouldn't believe, I've decided finally on this. The GuliKit KK3 MAX Controller. It is the perfect controller for Wilds, in my humble opinion. And in fact, in my testing already, it is my new daily driver controller for everything else, too. So hello again, I am Blunty, and if you're here for the nitty-gritty controller review stuff on the KK3 MAX, there's a timestamp on screen for you, because before we get there, I'm going to talk, probably extensively, about all the context that led me to this controller, why I got this controller when I have so many other controllers to choose from, and why I dismissed several other controllers, threw them into the box, no good, or at least not good enough. Now, back in early 23, I think, I reviewed this controller's predecessor. It's the KingKong 2 Pro, and I liked it very much. In fact, present tense, I like it very much. And I kept using it long after that review. It became my daily driver, but it has a couple of problems when it comes to what I want now, especially for Monster Hunter Wilds. Then there's this, a heavily customized PS5 controller from Hex Gaming. I reviewed that also a couple of years back. It too was in the running for the perfect Wilds controller, but it too fell short for a couple of reasons. Not good enough. Very fancy, not good enough. I even considered the humble Switch Pro controller, which sat in my hands for literally thousands of hours in Monster Hunter Rise, plus, every other Switch game I've ever played. But it too failed my needs versus wants. So, what the hell am I even looking for in a controller? Why am I being so friggin' picky and particular about all of this? Why so fussy, Blunty? Well, it all started when on the final day of the beta, during a Twitch live stream, I was doing some of my last tests. And at this point, I'd narrowed down my weapon choices to switch axe and hunting horn and light bowgun for ranged stuff. And it's that last one that triggered all of this fuss. And it has to do with aiming of the ranged weapons. See, mouse and keyboard kind of just suck ass for Monster Hunter in general. They sucked vast amounts of bum in World, they weren't much better in Rise, and for Wilds, yeah, it's the same, just not good. Which is a shame, because obviously a mouse is the vastly superior aiming input device for a ranged weapon. But aside from that, I also prefer the sort of lean back, more relaxed posture of a controller for basically everything but first-person shooters, and especially things I play for very long periods of time, in any given session, like Monster Hunter. So Wilds, like any other regular third-person action combat game with a ranged option worth its salt, has a few assists for the, inherently sloppier aim input of a thumbstick. A little stickiness here and there, a little auto-correction. It works fine. It's not too aggressive, it's nicely balanced, it works pretty good. In Monster Hunter World, for example, it was perfectly serviceable. In Monster Hunter Rise, they used the Nintendo Switch built-in motion control functions to bring in motion-assisted aiming to Monster Hunter, which I did not like in Rise. It felt kinda sloppy and imprecise, so I left it turned off for the entirety of my thousands of hours of playtime and simply aimed it the old-fashioned way. There are very few games where I find motion-assisted aiming to be useful or even pleasant. Breath of the Wilds was a very rare exception where I found its motion-assisted aiming for bows to be superb, and I loved it. It worked so friggin' well in that game. But in general, I don't like it. So, when I noticed that Monster Hunter Wilds has motion-assisted aiming as an option in its menus for both the PlayStation 5 version and the PC version, but not Xbox, because Xbox's only officially supported controller options don't have gyros. 2 out of 3, I got curious. Why wouldn't I test it? I was fully expecting not to like the new motion-assisted aiming that Monster Hunter Wilds has, but I'm also very much a suck it and see kind of guy. I don't like just making assumptions, especially when it's so simple to test it for myself. It would be silly to write it off without giving it a go. Which brings us all the way back to that final Wilds beta livestream. The controller I had been using up until that point was from another recent controller review, the surprisingly solid PowerA OPS V3 Pro. Terrible name, but it's a damn good controller. However, it does not have gyro motion controls. The KingKong 2 Pro does have motion controls, but only if you use it in the Nintendo Switch mode, not in the PC mode. And that, unfortunately, means it has a little extra input lag with the gyro compared to the Switch Pro controller, especially. Never an issue for me until now with that controller, because like I mentioned, I very rarely use the motion waggle stuff anyway. Oh, and of course the other issue is the damn button layout gets inverted in Switch mode, which drives me nuts. Not an unsolvable problem, but bothersome. And those are of course all the same reasons I wrote off using the actual Nintendo Switch Pro controller itself. Except it is slightly worse on PC thanks to the limits of its Bluetooth 3.0 connection and the low polling rate of the controller. Oh, and there is one more thing about all this that I'll get to in a moment. So the KK2 Pro is out. Next, the highly modded PlayStation 5 controller. It has built-in motion control that works natively with Steam input, fantastic. It has a better polling rate, awesome. And it has a hair trigger mod on L2 and R2, great for responsiveness in shooters. And Monster Hunter doesn't use analog input for anything anywhere else in the entire game, so it's no big deal that it's gone. So I did a day's worth of testing, mainly with the modded PlayStation 5 controller, although I did also try the Switch Pro controller as well. But the take-home is this. I really liked how motion-assisted aiming works in Wilds. I can't tell you exactly what the quantitative difference is between this and how Rise did it. They're probably very, very similar. But I can't articulate why I like this so much better than what they did in Rise. It felt real good to me and made a significant difference in how easily and how accurately I could target weak spots and specific body parts, and that's all that matters. I don't need to explain it, it just feels good to do it, so I want to do it. And this modded PlayStation 5 controller has programmable back paddles. And here is that other thing that I mentioned. And it might be pretty specific to how I play games, not something like 100% of other players will relate to at all, but stick with me here. In a lot of games, including Monster Hunter, on my preferred controller layout, that being the Xbox style of asymmetrical sticks, I will frequently use my right thumb to reach across to the D-pad for a quick input, say, for one relevant example with Wilds, for calling in the secret mounts or triggering a weapon switch. Doing it this way means my left thumb never has to leave the directional input on the left stick, so I don't have to stop moving to do anything with the D-pad. It's damn useful in a lot of games, and it's deeply buried in my muscle memory after years upon years upon years of doing this in various games. Especially useful if like quick heals or something are on a D-pad input, you know what I mean? But obviously, the PlayStation 5's stupid controller layout makes that wildly awkward to attempt. For all practical intents and purposes, it's impossible to do, comfortably at least, which is why I like the back paddles on this controller. Those I can assign to the D-pad inputs, and then both my thumbs stay where they were. I don't have to drop any other input control to quickly give a D-pad input a tab. So, this modded PlayStation 5 controller is ticking all of the boxes that I needed for Wilds. This was clearly the choice of controller, I thought to myself. Except, aside from the symmetrical stick layout not being my personal preference for comfortable long-term play, like, I don't hate it, but, you know, give me the choice and I'll pick the Xbox-style asymmetrical layout every single time. There is, however, one more very large, very, very deal-breaking issue. I have been known to burn down entire days playing and indeed streaming Monster Hunter and various other games. It's one of those games that I can really sink into on a day off. Just the entire day gets buried in it. It's wonderful. And, well, the PlayStation 5 controller sucks bums for that, because it has an atrocious battery life. Just shockingly bad. Like, how? Like, I've ranted about this so many times, but how did someone, the people in Sony sit down and go, yep, 5 or 6 hours battery life on a controller in this day and age? That's fine. Nobody plays games for longer than that. So out of touch. So I know what you're saying. Just plug it in, Blunty. Just plug it in. Plug it in. USB. Just plug it in. Yeah, I could do that. And indeed, of course, I've been forced to do that on many occasions of PlayStation 5 play, or indeed using this controller on PC. But that's a compromise. I don't want to have to do that. I find it physically annoying to have a cable draped across and over me and stuff. I grew up with controllers that had no other option but to be cabled, and I was not sad to see that go away. I don't want it back. So one option around that problem was to get myself a third-party battery of much more significant capacity, which are pretty easy to get. It's quite an easy fix, and it's relatively inexpensive. And I still might actually do that for that controller, just to make it more useful. But then I found the GuliKit KK3 MAX Controller, and it already had everything that I want, with zero compromises on layout, zero compromises on compatibility, zero compromises on functionality, zero compromises on usable battery life. So, basics first, let's get into the kind of review proper of this thing. Hall effect joysticks, of course, and Hall effect triggers, naturally. These are now basically standard in any decent third-party controller. Used to be something special, but now it's pretty much expected on everything but the absolute cheapest, dirt basic, crappy controllers. And first-party controllers. GuliKit called these ones, though, their second-generation Hall effect sticks. And believe it or not, they do make a measurable improvement. That's not just marketing. They are significantly, noticeably, measurably better. The circularity on these is, in a word, perfect. The previous model, the KK3 Pro, was very good. Highly sensitive, highly responsive, but if you're going to be hyper picky about it, its circularity was a little bit off, a little bit inconsistent. Still better than a lot of other controllers out there, you bet, but yeah. These new ones are stunningly accurate and sensitive in the extreme. In the zero dead zone mode, you even so much as rest your thumb on the stick, even lightly. There is a measurable force transmitted from the controller. You can activate a dead zone mode if this is an issue in one game or another, like they're way too sensitive for whatever reason, but it shouldn't be. I haven't come across any problems using the zero dead zone mode yet in anything I've played. But yeah, with basically perfect circularity and ridiculously sensitive directional control input, this is the most precise controller I have ever tested. And they roll around really smoothly too. No hitches, no grinding, it's just smooth all the way around. It's quite lovely, actually. There's also a hotkey combo to reduce the sensitivity, and you can do this in each stick independently. Not sure how often this will come in handy, but it is an interesting option to have. I know sometimes I switch my mouse sensitivity on the fly in some games. My mouse has a special shortcut button especially for doing that. And every now and again it comes in really handy, so it might be handy to do that on a controller too. The face buttons are ever so slightly mushier than the KK2's, but they're still nicely tactile, noticeably sharper than the Switch Pro controller buttons are, and a little lighter to press than the Xbox. They feel probably closest to the PlayStation 5 controller when it comes to activation force and tactile feedback. The D-pad is a closer match for the Switch Pro controller's D-pad with perhaps slightly more travel. It also has an optional 4-directional mode, which again you can activate just with a combination button press, no extra software or anything needed to do any of this. So if you're into a very particular type of retro gaming, this is a fantastic thing to have. It entirely eliminates any accidental diagonal input whatsoever. The 4 cardinal directions are the only thing that happen, no crosstalk, nothing. It's great for, like I said, a very, very specific type of retro gaming. In the regular 8-direction mode, it feels pretty damn good. It's a pretty decent D-pad. Not the best out there, but pretty decent. The shoulder buttons feel closest to the PlayStation 5's, and the triggers feel closest to a standard Xbox controller, but smoother and more linear feeling when you use them. That's probably down to the Hall effect thing. But And here's one of the things that sold it to me for my needs. There is a mechanical switch for shortening the bottom out activation throw of each trigger. It is not really a true hair trigger like the one on my modded controller, but it feels damn close and gives a significantly shortened throw and maintains the tactile activation click. It is a faux head trigger. But of course, unlike my modded controller, I don't completely lose the ability to use analog input. If and when I need it back, it's a switch away. And when I do want it head trigger style, it is a noticeable increase in responsiveness, of course. It has programmable back pedals and buttons too. These are actually detachable. You can take them or leave them. So if you don't like them, you can just leave them off. If you only want two, you can just put two of them on. There's also a choice of the paddles or a more switch-like nub for two of them. I wound up most comfortable with just the two nubs attached. I've never been a fan of the long paddle style ones. I find that I accidentally hit them way too often while gripping my controller just normally. So the two little nubby guys just all on their own give me exactly what I need from it. The battery is a 950 mAh LiPo, which doesn't sound like much, but they do claim to deliver up to 28 hours of life on a charge. And while of course under real-world conditions that's a difficult thing to measure, but it certainly seems close to what I've been getting. But that is if you leave the LED lights off, which you can do, of course, and there's a few modes of lighting available too, although sadly not selectable RGB. These are RGB LEDs in there, but the different colors are instead reserved to use as mode indicators. You don't get to choose them for fashion's sake. But if you do leave the lights on, you're still getting about 15 hours of battery life, which is still like literally triple the battery life of the PlayStation 5 controller, and 15 hours in one sitting should be enough for even my most chair potato of gaming days. Like its predecessor, it is a multi-mode controller having compatibility modes for Windows, for Nintendo Switch, for Android, and iOS. It does, however, drop the ancient X input mode that the KK2 had in favor of a mode for a new, dedicated USB dongle. The controller IDs as a standard Xbox controller when using the dongle, but using the dongle instead of the standard Bluetooth connection gets you a 1000 Hz polling rate. The regular Xbox controller is a 125 Hz polling rate, so 1000 is a lot more. I'm not super awesome at math, but I'm pretty sure that's a lot more. Now, if you can actually feel that or not in regular gameplay, probably not for most people. Like the difference between 125 Hz and 1000 Hz of polling on a controller, I don't think most people are going to notice that just in whether playing regularly. But having a dedicated dongle does help make the connection absolutely rock solid. It minimizes latency in general and helps with supporting the superb sensitivity of those sticks. Now, let's finally talk about motion control, one of the key things behind the entire friggin' story of all this. Like its predecessor, the native motion control is a Nintendo Switch mode only feature, but it is very noticeably much more responsive on the KK3 MAX than my KK2 Pro. Like, way better. Much snappier, much more accurate, much less laggy feeling. It is really good. And it does one other thing that I really love about it when I'm using it in Switch mode. Out of box, it is a Nintendo button layout, but it comes with a replacement button set to Xbox standard layout. Switching the letters on the buttons is just cosmetic though. It's not going to be super useful if pressing the A button still inputs a B command, right? Well, here's where the cleverness comes in. With the touch of yet another hotkey button combo, the controller itself inverts internally the A, B, and XY buttons to Xbox standard, even if you're in Nintendo Switch mode. So now I can be in Switch mode with its full and native highly responsive motion control, and I get to maintain that Xbox input layout which is native for PC use. So, best of both worlds for PC gaming. There is yet another option though. In the dongle mode, the one with the super high polling rate, the controller can also kind of fake motion control while still connected as a native Xbox controller as far as the PC sees. And you can set this to trigger on either the left shoulder or the left trigger press, the two almost universally default buttons for aiming. So anytime your aim button of choice is pressed, it activates the gyro sensor and pushes that motion data across to the right stick input instead. It is kind of noticeably sloppier than the Nintendo Switch native motion control mode, and it can drift a bit just by the nature of how it's working with the right stick input, but it does work and you can adjust to it fairly quickly. It definitely feels different to native gyro aiming mode, but you can adjust around it. And there's 3 different sensitivity modes for it too. The lowest is a very slight amount of input, nice for finely adjusting your regular stick aim. The other modes get progressively more aggressive in how sensitive they are to motion. And the maximum sensitivity mode is, well, just way too much in my opinion. I wish we could fine tune this, to be frank. But hey, it's nice to have options anyway. And while it is not nearly as clean feeling or consistent as the Nintendo mode motion input, which is its own separately processed input data, and this mode is forced to push the gyro data to the right stick input instead, it still might be preferable in some use cases. Mainly because you get to maintain that super high polling rate the dongle uses, but also, if it escaped your notice up until this point, it means you can use motion-assisted aiming in games that simply do not support that feature, like Monster Hunter World here, which in exactly 0 ways natively supports gyro aiming at all. But as you can see, thanks to the controller's trickery, I can use motion controller aiming in this game. But frankly, I think I'll stick to the Nintendo mode motion control with Wilds. It does feel nicer, but of course I will be using it with the Xbox button input mode to save my sanity, and then I'll assign the back switches to the up and down on the D-pad that I can use for calling in Sacred and calling in the weapon switching. 2 things super useful to be able to do without stopping character movement or lifting my thumbs off the other inputs. So, best of 3 worlds in one controller. Also, you might have noticed the somewhat retro Nintendo-inspired color scheme. It does come in plain black and simple white also if you hate joy, but as if I could resist that lovely warm grey and glassy purple. Subtle, but pretty. It has a few other tricks too, but I'll literally never use them if I'm honest with you. First is a turbo fire thing. It does turbo firing, which very old school. The other is a somewhat more useful and fun thing for some people, but I still doubt I will make much use of it. You can record macros to it. In fact, you can record up to 10 minutes of button and stick inputs and automatically play them back on command. Might be useful for things like doing sort of big batch crafting or something. 10 minutes of recorded button macros is kind of insane to me. I doubt anyone's going to need that, but I'd rather have way too much than not enough, I guess. But yeah, not a thing I'm terribly interested in using. Oh, and the vibration motors. I haven't mentioned those yet, have I? You've got 3 level settings on those, and it's fine. It's middle of the road vibrational feedback kind of stuff. I don't care much about vibrating crap in my controllers, to be honest with you. In some cases it's useful to have a little bit of it, but more often than not I find it a bit distracting. So you can turn it all the way off or select one of 3 intensity levels. I chose the lowest vibrational setting, so I can still feel it when I need to, but it's not, so intense it's distracting. Again, nice to have options. But yeah, the super crisp stick responsiveness and perfect circularity, the ability to swap between Nintendo and Xbox button layouts on the fly, the back pedals, the trigger stops, the choice of 2 gyro motion modes, and the good to great battery life. And the generally really nice fit, feel, finish, size, weight. It all means this is my ideal choice of controller for Wilds, and in fact gaming in general, as it is indeed now my main daily driver controller, replacing the KK3 Pro and the PowerA OPS V3 Pro, which I have been hopping between lately depending on what I'm playing. It is a damn fine controller. Damn fine. Can recommend. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. I will catch you next time. Thank you as always to the patrons whose above and beyond support I appreciate very deeply indeed, and frankly you guys bought me that controller. Thanks patrons, I love it. We'll call it an early Christmas present.